Hi everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wondered about music. So whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. Now, I wanted to try something different for this week's episode. I'm always on the lookout for what's going on in the world of music psych, and a few weeks ago, I did an episode on new technological advancements that are using music psych research. So today, I wanted to talk about a study that caught my eye this week. We're going to be diving into this brand new study which was published in the Psychology of Music journal, and it maps the inner journeys that we take when we listen to different types of music. And what I loved about this study is it doesn't just ask us how music makes us feel, it asks what music makes us think as well. So have you ever put on a song and suddenly just found yourself drifting into maybe a vivid memory from years ago, or maybe a piece of music even sparked an entire story in your head? You've got full-on characters, scenes, emotions, everything. We all listen to music, often without thinking, but what's happening inside of our minds when we listen is often just as rich and complex as the music itself. So let's get into this research. For decades, music psychology has mostly focused on one central question: how does music make us feel? Researchers have explored how sad music makes us cry, how upbeat tracks lift our energy, and how some songs soothe our nerves. And of course, that's undoubtedly important. Of course, I'm sitting here right now and almost all of my episodes are focused on such things. But because emotion is such a central part of why we listen, it's also only part of the picture. See, music doesn't just influence how we feel, it also shapes how we think. And if you've ever experienced those things that I put in your head at the beginning of the episode, it's because sometimes music doesn't just move us emotionally. It activates our inner world in such a quiet but fascinating way. So the study that I'm going to be chatting about today is actually conducted by a PhD student called Hazel van der Wal. And this was conducted in collaboration with some really great names in the field, including Dr. Kelly Jakubowski. And I think what really caught my eye with this research is it flips the traditional approach to music research on its head by asking a more cognitive question. What kind of thoughts does music trigger? Not just feelings, but memories, daydreams, mental imagery, and even moments of complete stillness. And by doing so, it opens up a far richer, more layered understanding of what's going on inside of our minds when we press play. So to explore this question, the researchers recruited over 700 participants from across the UK and the US. Now, these weren't expert musicians or trained listeners, just everyday people who listen to music in their daily lives. Now, each participant was presented with a series of 30-second audio clips from a super diverse range of actually 17 genres of music. So we're talking everything from ambient to classical, from hip hop and metal to 80s, folk, video game music, and film scores. And after each clip, they weren't asked whether they liked it or how it made them feel. Instead, they were simply asked, what kind of thoughts did you have while listening? And that one question, so simple yet so open-ended, produced a remarkably rich set of responses. It allowed participants to reflect freely and honestly on what unfolded in their minds. And the results go far beyond basic reactions like, I liked it or it made me feel calm. Instead, they do reveal this internal landscape, almost like a spectrum of thought experiences that really reflect just how cognitively active we are when we listen to music. Some people described reliving specific memories in their life, and others reported imagining scenes or fictional stories. Some experienced abstract visuals like shapes, colors, and textures, and Others notice their minds drifting to everyday concerns like their to-do list or what they were going to have for dinner. And some describe something much rarer, the sense of no thoughts at all, just pure presence. And what's striking is that this study doesn't reduce listening down to a binary. It doesn't treat music as a mood enhancer alone. Instead, it positions music as a kind of mental collaborator, something we don't just react to, but actively think with. It suggests that when we listen to music, we're not just moved, we're prompted. We're drawn into memory, into imagination, and wondering and reflection. And maybe that's one of the reasons music is such a uniquely human phenomenon. It doesn't just accompany our lives, it really intersects with the way that we process the world. It becomes part of our mental landscape. And what this study gives us then is a kind of map, a way of understanding not just what we feel when we hear music, but what it does to the shape and texture of our thoughts. So once the researchers asked people to tune into their thoughts while listening, what did they actually find? Let's dig into some of these examples that I gave. So turns out our minds are rarely silent. In fact, across all the responses, people reported having some kind of thought while listening in more than 90% of cases. And I think that's a powerful reminder that even when we think we're passively enjoying music, our inner world is still very much alive. Music in many ways is a mental activator. The most common, perhaps unsurprisingly, were what the researchers call music-related thoughts. And these are the analytical or descriptive impressions we might have about the sound itself. Things like, oh, this beat is amazing, I love the violin here, or this reminds me of another artist I know. And these are the thoughts that stay close to the surface of the music, the structure, the rhythm, the instrumentation, and they suggest that a lot of us engage with music intellectually as well as emotionally. Sometimes we're not swept away, we're curious, attentive, and mentally dissecting what we're hearing. But then it gets more interesting. About 1 in 4 participants experienced media memories, and these are moments where the music conjures up a scene from a film, a TV show, or a video game, even when the music they were hearing wasn't actually from one. And this tells us something super fascinating. Our brains love narrative. We're constantly searching for story and for context. If a song feels cinematic, our mind may fill in the gaps, borrowing from scenes that we've watched before or even inventing new ones to fit the mood. It becomes this kind of cognitive projector screen. And close behind were what the researchers term fictional imaginings. And these are thoughts where listeners spontaneously created a story or imagined scenes and visual elements that didn't come from memory but emerged in the moment. Some people imagined dancing in a room or colors swirling in space. Others described more abstract visuals like shapes, textures, and patterns, like seeing the music unfold inside of their minds. These fictional thoughts, in so many ways, speak to music's ability to open up imaginative space. It doesn't just transport us, it transforms us into storytellers. And then, of course, there's autobiographical memories, which I feel like I talk about the most, but these are the deeply personal moments that music can call up with deep precision. So a single chord progression might transport you back to a summer you had when you were 18 years old. A certain song might take you back to a breakup or a childhood drive with your parents. And actually, in this study, around 16% of the listening moments triggered these kinds of personal recollections. And that might seem lower than expected, especially given the amount that I talk about musical memories. But remember, these clips, like I said, they were short. They were 30 seconds. They were also unfamiliar and varied. And I think that the fact that memory still surfaced at all, it says a lot about how strongly music is intertwined with our sense of identity and past. And then there's what you think might be the most common, and that's mind wandering, or what the study calls everyday thoughts. And these include these random, mundane things that float into our heads, like what to make for dinner, something you forgot to do earlier, the grocery list. Surprisingly, these thoughts were less frequent than the more immersive, imaginative, or memory-based types. And that's worth pausing on. Even though we often use music as background noise, our minds are doing more than just filling time. We're actually not always zoning out. We're zoning in very particular cognitive ways. So next time you hit play on a song, whether it's something new, something familiar, or something instrumental, try asking yourself, where is my mind going? Are you reliving an old moment, building a new story, noticing the music, or just letting your thoughts drift off? I think that simple act of awareness, of being conscious of what music unlocks in your mental space, it can really change how you listen, because music doesn't just entertain us, it gives us access to corners of our minds that we may not even know that we're visiting. It's not just background, it's really a bridge between attention and imagination and memory and just possibility. Now let's move on to talking about the genre of music that they listen to. And this is a part of the study where things really start to open up. And honestly, this is where I found myself getting the most excited when I read it for the first time, because it's one thing to say that music makes us think, but it's another to ask, does the kind of music we listen to shape the kind of thinking that we do? And according to the data, the answer is yes. Genre does matter, not just for how music sounds or feels, but for how it structures our mental experience. Different musical styles seem to pull our thoughts in different directions. They almost act like directors of these inner movies that we've got going on, deciding whether we'll drift off into a memory, imagine a fantasy, or simply stay grounded in the music itself. Let's start with one of the most striking examples from the study, and that's film music. So unsurprisingly, this genre was the most powerful trigger for both media memories and fictional imaginings. When people listened to film scores, they were more likely to picture scenes from a movie or TV show, sometimes ones they'd seen before and sometimes something completely new. And film music, it seems, it activates the narrative brain. It bypasses the part of us that analyzes and critiques, and instead invites us into a world. In fact, the study found that when participants listened to film music, they were less likely to have music-related thoughts, meaning they weren't focused on the structure or instrumentation. They weren't thinking, oh, this is such a beautiful crescendo, or I love how the strings sound here. They were simply immersed. And that makes sense. Culturally, we've been trained to associate orchestral swells and cinematic motifs with story. From childhood, we've learnt that certain sounds mean action or romance or danger, triumph. And film scores speak in the language of drama and movement. Our minds are just responding accordingly. Classical music also showed a similar effect. It was another strong driver of fictional imagery. The difference is that while film music is often tightly connected to a specific story or emotional cue, classical music, especially instrumental works, tends to be a little bit more abstract. But even within that abstraction, classical pieces are often rich in what's called programmatic qualities. So think about something like The Nutcracker, which conjures a fairy tale world through sound alone. These are stories told not in words, but in melodies, harmonies, and tonal shifts. So it's not surprising that listeners would project their own imagined narratives onto this kind of music. Classical music kind of gives you this skeleton of a world, and your mind just kind of fills in the rest. And then there's video game music, which had a very different but equally fascinating effect. So according to the study, video game soundtracks actually reduce the amount of mind-wandering and everyday thought. So rather than sparking memory or elaborate stories, this genre helped listeners stay more mentally present. One possible reason is that video game music is specifically designed to support immersion and concentration. It's composed to keep players focused on the gameplay, subtly enhancing the emotional tone of the game without distracting them from the task at hand. When we hear these kinds of soundtracks, even outside of the game context, our brains might enter that same focused, flow-like state, almost as if our cognitive system says, okay, I know what this is for, I'm locking in. Other genres showed more subtle patterns, but still offered important insights. For example, folk, jazz, and country music tended to elicit more autobiographical memories, particularly when the music was familiar to the listener. These genres often contain lyrics and storytelling elements that are more grounded, personal, and intimate. A folk song, for example, it might remind someone of a road trip. A jazz standard might bring back memories of parents' vinyl collection. Familiarity plays a big role here, not just in recognizing the music, but in the memories and emotional associations that we've attached to them over time. But one of the key takeaways from this part of the study is music doesn't just soundtrack our lives, it literally scripts our thoughts. It guides the way that our mind wanders, constructs, recalls, or focuses. And what's so beautiful about that idea is it means that we can choose how we want to think, at least to some extent, by choosing what we listen to. So if you want to escape into a fictional world, maybe try a film score or a lush piece of classical music. If you need to concentrate or get into flow, try ambient game soundtracks. And if you're feeling reflective, longing to reconnect with maybe parts of your past, put on something familiar from a genre that means something to you. The genre you choose isn't just about taste, it's also about cognitive orientation. It nudges your brain towards certain kinds of inner experiences and away from others. So the next time you press play, ask yourself not just what do I want to feel, but what kind of thinking do I want to do? Do I want to remember, imagine, focus, or drift? Because the genre that you reach for might be doing more than you realize. Now, let's shift the focus to the things that are a little bit closer to home, away from genre and into something more personal, your relationship with the music that you listen to. Because as much as the style of music influences what we think about while listening, the way that we connect to a specific song, it matters just as much, if not more. The study didn't just look at musical features like genre or tempo, it also considered how familiar the music was to each listener and how much they enjoyed it. And what they found is a reminder that our playlists are far more psychologically powerful than we often give them credit for. Let's start with familiarity. The study showed that the more familiar a piece of music was, the more likely it was to trigger autobiographical memories. And that's probably not surprising, especially if you're a regular on the Sound Mind. As we know, songs that we've heard many times are often attached to specific moments in our lives. They become like musical bookmarks. Think of a song that instantly transports you back to your school years, or the one that always brings back a particular relationship, a holiday, or even just a mood. In these cases, the song acts like a key. It's like a direct access point to your past. And in the study, familiarity also increased abstract imaginings and music-focused thoughts. So beyond triggering memories, familiar music also encouraged people to pay more attention to the sonic details, or allowed their minds to wander into less literal, more sensory territory. But there was an interesting flip side, actually. So familiarity actually reduced the occurrence of media memories. And when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. So if you know a song isn't from a film or game, your brain doesn't try to insert it into one. You're less likely to imagine it scoring a dramatic scene or connecting it to a fictional narrative. Instead, it sits firmly in the context of your life, not someone else's. It's yours, it's known, and it's already been woven into your own personal story. Enjoyment too also played a major role. So when people enjoyed the music that they heard, even if it was unfamiliar, they were significantly more likely to experience fictional imaginings and autobiographical memories. In other words, liking a piece of music opens up your mind. It creates the conditions for deeper engagement. instead of zoning out or thinking about mundane tasks, listeners who reported enjoying the music were more likely to go inward, to recall something personal or to imagine something new. Enjoyment, it seems, is a kind of permission slip for the mind to wander creatively and reflectively. And here's what's even more fascinating. So, when participants didn't enjoy the music, they were actually more likely to experience what we call everyday, more mindless thoughts like chores, errands, or nothing at all. So, pleasure really does matter. Liking what you hear doesn't just affect your mood, it shapes the quality of your mental experience while listening. It determines whether your mind is simply passing time or expanding into something more meaningful. And that brings a whole new perspective. So when we talk about our favorite songs, we're actually not just talking about taste or vibes. We're talking about songs that quite literally structure our thinking. These aren't just tracks that we return to for nostalgia or comfort. They're literally memory portals, creative prompts, and emotional mirrors. They're the songs that help us remember who we were, imagine who we might become, or just spend a few moments in a space that feels fully and deeply ours. I think it's easy to overlook this, especially in an age of algorithm-driven listening and passive background noise. But the songs that we love, truly love, they aren't just entertainment. They're tools for self-access. They really do open up parts of us that we might otherwise not visit. And the more that we listen with intention, the more that we start to notice what those songs are actually doing to our minds. Now, beyond genre, familiarity, and enjoyment, the researchers also explored some of the more subtle musical features that influence our thinking. Things like how much the music changed over time and how emotionally expressive it felt. Now, these might seem like small details, but they actually do play a surprisingly powerful role in shaping the kind of mental experience that we have while listening. So let's start with contrast. In musical terms, contrast refers to how much a piece of music varies. So whether it shifts in rhythm, dynamics, instrumentation, or melodic structure over time. And the researchers found that music with higher contrast was linked to fewer thoughts about mundane, everyday concerns. In other words, when the music kept changing, it kept people's minds engaged. So instead of zoning out or thinking about errands, they stayed connected to what they were hearing. It's as if our brains respond to contrast as a form of novelty. And that makes sense when you think about how we experience interest and attention more broadly. So when things are repetitive or predictable, our minds do start to drift. But when we're presented with variation, we lean in. So a song with contrast might not just sound more interesting, but it might actually hold your thoughts in place, guiding them more intentionally through a landscape rather than just letting them slip into distraction. And then there's the emotional tone of the music, or what researchers call valence and arousal. And valence refers to whether the music sounds positive or negative, while arousal refers to how energizing or intense the track feels. And here too, the results were surprisingly nuanced. So music that was higher in positive valence, so happy-sounding music, was more likely to spark fictional imaginings. So upbeat or pleasant tracks tended to open the mind creatively, encouraging listeners to invent stories, scenes, or visual imagery. And that tracks with our own experience, doesn't it? When we feel good, we tend to become more imaginative, more playful. And when we feel down, it's really hard to think about anything at all. The music lifts us out of the ordinary and into the possibility. But the more surprising finding came with arousal. So you might expect that high-energy music, like fast tempos, loud dynamics, and driving beats, would keep people more mentally engaged. But in this study, it actually did the opposite. Now, I found this super interesting. So high arousal tracks actually increased the likelihood of everyday mundane thoughts. So instead of sparking imagination or memory, they prompted things like mental checklists and future planning. Now, it is a little bit counterintuitive at first, but it might reveal something important about how we process stimulation. When the music is too energizing, it might not hold our attention inside the music. It might push our mental energy outward toward productivity, organization, or external concerns. Essentially, your brain revs up and starts planning what's next. And this has practical implications. So if you're trying to stay creatively focused, say you're writing, drawing, or trying to reflect, you might want to avoid those high-octane tracks. They might be energizing, but they could be too energizing, pulling you out of that reflective space and into task mode. Instead, I would say opt for music that's emotionally rich but steady. Something with warmth, beauty, and variation, but not so much energy that your brain feels like it has to keep up. Now, I wanted to talk about this piece of research today because it isn't just for professionals, it's for anyone who listens to music, which is basically all of us. Music is such a powerful and constant presence in our lives, but most of us don't really think about how it's affecting our minds beneath the surface. The songs that we choose can shape not just how we feel, but how we think. So the next time you build a playlist, ask yourself, what kind of mental space do I want to create? Being intentional about what you listen to can turn music from background noise into this powerful tool for mood, creativity, and mental clarity. So if you're about to dive into a creative project or need to concentrate, think instrumental music or film scores. That can literally be your secret weapon. Without lyrics to compete with your attention, these kinds of music offer a steady, engaging background that really keep your brain alert but not overwhelmed. Think of it like white noise but with personality. It encourages your mind to stay on task and spark fresh ideas without dragging you into emotional highs or lows. So next time you're stuck on a problem or need to power through a task, try swapping out your usual playlist for some cinematic instrumentals. But what if you need to relax and reflect? Sometimes you need to just slow down and take a mental breather. Now, that's where nostalgic, familiar favorites come in. These songs act like a warm, emotional hug, kind of gently coaxing your brain to revisit meaningful memories and feelings. So listening to that track from your teenage years or a song that you associate with a special moment, it can support introspection and emotional processing. It's like your brain gets permission to wander through the past safely, which can be deeply soothing and even therapeutic. So when you want to unwind after a stressful day or do some self-reflection, reach for those timeless tunes that feel like a soundtrack to your life. But if you want to open the door to creative daydreaming and new ideas, seek out music with a happy tone and perhaps some rich storytelling elements. Songs or compositions that have an uplifting mood and narrative flow encourage your mind to wander into fictional or imaginative spaces. This isn't just about feeling good, it's about unlocking mental pathways that allow you to picture new scenarios, invent stories, or simply experience joy through music's emotional journey. So whether it's a catchy indie pop tune with clever lyrics or a lush orchestral piece that tells a story without words, this kind of music, it can really fuel your creativity in super surprising ways. Try it out, see how it goes, and let me know. But by becoming more aware of how music shapes your thoughts and emotions, you can start using it intentionally. Instead of having music play passively in the background, treat it like a tool. One that supports your mood, your productivity, your creative flow, and your emotional well-being. This simple shift in awareness can transform your daily listening habits and help you harness the full power of music in your life. But of course, no study is perfect, and I do want to touch a little bit on some limitations of this paper as well. And understanding these limitations, it isn't about diminishing the findings. It's actually more about appreciating where the next exciting discoveries in music psychology will take us. Whenever I'm reading through a paper, it's always getting your brain cogs turning. It's thinking, okay, where can this go next? What does this limitation unlock for the future? And one of the first things to acknowledge is that this research, by its very nature, relies on self-report. So that means that participants were simply asked to tell the researchers what they were thinking. And while, of course, that's crucial for understanding internal experiences, we all know that our introspection isn't always perfect. Sometimes we're not great at fully articulating what's going on in our own minds, or perhaps we simplify it for the sake of the survey. So while it's incredibly valuable, this approach gives us a snapshot of reported thoughts, not necessarily a direct, unfiltered stream of consciousness. Another practical limitation was the use of short music clips. So I mentioned that these were just 30 seconds per song. And this was, of course, necessary for the scale of the study and to have this kind of systematic approach, allowing participants to experience all of those genres without experiencing fatigue as well. But our everyday music listening often happens over much longer periods. Maybe a 3-minute pop song, a 10-minute classical movement, or even sitting through an hour-long album. But what happens to our thoughts as a piece of music evolves over minutes, or even over an entire immersive album? Do patterns of thought shift from memory to imagination, or from focus to mind-wandering? I think that's a super rich area, ripe for future exploration, and so fascinating because I definitely see a difference in the way that I interact with playlists and albums or singles, for example. It's really, I do feel a shift in my mental state. And of course, that can be due to the factors that we discussed today. But yeah, I would really find it interesting to see that. And then there's the cultural scope. So this study gathered participants in music primarily from the UK and the US. And while incredibly diverse within that Western context, it leaves a huge, fascinating question mark hanging over how these findings might translate globally. For example, would Bollywood scores with their vibrant narratives and dance sequences evoke different patterns of thought? And what about the intricate melodic systems of Arabic maqams or the polyrhythmic complexities of Afrobeats? Music is such a universal human phenomenon, but its cultural contexts are so incredibly varied. So understanding how these thought patterns manifest across different musical traditions worldwide is a monumental yet crucial next step, I think. So these limitations, far from being drawbacks, they're actually super exciting signposts for future research. So scientists might now dive deeper into specific musical elements. So beyond broad categories like genre or contrast, what about the really nitty-gritty elements? So do certain tempos uniquely trigger nostalgia? Do specific chord progressions unlock creativity? And how does the instrumentation, say a solo piano versus a full orchestra, influence the thoughts that we have? Pinpointing these precise sonic ingredients could unlock even more precise applications, I think. And then also individual differences. So how do our personalities, perhaps our levels of musical training, or even our everyday moods interact with music to shape our thoughts? Do highly imaginative people experience more fictional narratives regardless of genre? Do musicians think more about the music than non-musicians? I think there are so many dimensions of personality that come into our interactions with music. So I'd love to see that broken down a little more. And then, of course, those cross-cultural comparisons, they'll really be essential for building a truly universal psychology of music. So while the study has given us an incredible map of our musical minds, consider it a brief exploration into uncharted territory. There's so much more to discover, and it's a testament to, honestly, the ongoing power of scientific inquiry. There's infinite possibilities, and I absolutely love just keeping up to date with the research and just discovering new articles like this one. But that is it for today's episode. Let me know what you think about this new format. I was thinking maybe to do this once a month or so, kind of tap into an exciting, perhaps new piece of research and break it down for you all, because I know that you're not going to be like me and sitting there reading scientific journals, so I'm here to make it easier for you and pick out all the exciting bits. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Sound Mind. If you have enjoyed the episode, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, come and say hi on Instagram and Threads at the Sound Mind Talks. Let me know what you think, and yeah, keep engaging in such amazing discussions with me. I always love hearing from all of you and really just sharing fun little bite-sized facts with you throughout the weeks as well. So yeah, come and say hi over there. But until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on the Sound Mind.